I thought my world fell apart when my father died. It felt as though he had been healthy one day and then gone the next. To be fair, reality was not far away from that. He was diagnosed with a late-stage cancer only 2 months before his passing. I was 10, but I remember the somber mood that fell upon my family. A dark cloud had formed above our heads, and I figured the best thing I could do was hold an umbrella, hoping the rain would never come. Try as I might, there was nothing I could do to prevent his death, as I'm sure you could have guessed. My mother was broken. They had been high school sweethearts, together since they were kids. I remember hearing her on the phone with Grandma the day before he died. "I can't live without him, you know that," she said. Somehow, though, she carried on. I think if it weren't for me, she would have died too. But she always told me how I reminded her of him and how much she loved me. I was her son and only child, and it was apparent that my father's genes were the dominant ones in my makeup. When we found out my father was ill, my parents bought a cabin on a lake in upstate New York. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the cowtowns and vast expanses of space that make up the better part of that region, but it was somewhere my parents had loved. For my safety, I will leave out exactly where it was, but the small town and even smaller lakeside community provided lots of unexplored land for me, and a private retreat for my parents in their final weeks together. My father only made it up there once, but the joy I saw on his face every moment of that trip is an image I hold dear. Mom and I would go up there often after he died. I think living at home was too much for her, between neighbors dropping off casseroles and the whispers all over about the poor young widow. I can't say I blamed her, and I rather enjoyed our trips to the cottage. Those hot summer days turned into cool nights, and I would fall asleep in the loft dreaming of my father smiling. Face as he had tucked me in those few nights I spent with him in the cottage. There was one space in the cottage that was off limits, and that was my mom's room. It was her private space and sanctuary from the outside world. You see, she worked busy hours and needed rest every time we went up there. She worked as a doctor, and I think that took a toll on her. I think what hurt her even more was that she couldn't do anything but make my dad comfortable in his final days despite her multiple degrees. She spent a lot of time in her room, but I didn't really mind. I was pretty good at entertaining myself. Sometimes she would let me bring a friend, and we would spend hours in the woods, kayaking to the small island in the middle of the lake, and climbing hundreds of trees trying to find the perfect lookout spot. Mom continued to go up there almost every weekend, but I stopped going every time as I grew older. Between parties, friends, work, and the few girlfriends I went through, there was usually something I'd rather do. I regret that now, leaving my mom to travel alone, but I didn't really care then. I moved out right after I graduated high school and began working as a carpenter. I found joy in bringing people homes that would make them feel as my mother did when we went to the cottage. It was 2 weeks ago that I got a call that my mother had died. A robbery gone wrong was what the police had told me when I arrived at the station. As I was her sole heir, they first suspected me. After proving my alibi, they allowed me to leave. Everything is a blur for a while between tears and the realization that I had no parents at 20 years old. I hardly had time to think. What was even worse was that they had no leads on who killed my mother, and that not a single piece of evidence was left behind. I began to doubt their robbery theory, as nothing was taken aside from a few folders in her house and her car keys. The police figured they just wanted her Audi and thought the car's paperwork would be in the files they took. I think that's a load of horse shit. Not long after I buried the only parent I had left, her will was read and I was given every one of her possessions. I got the keys to the cottage today and told my work I would be out for a week or so, and then began the hour drive to my mother's happy place. I hadn't been there in probably 5 or 6 years, and I guess I never realized how much work the place needed. The yard was overgrown, and upon entering, I saw how dated the kitchen was. Relieving myself resulted in another discovery: some clogged pipes. I had used the hall bath and tried to find a plunger to no avail. I decided to go into the master bedroom to see if one would be there. I was greeted instantly by a strange and rather foul odor when I opened the door. I stepped into the room, figuring it was just from the place needing a good cleaning. I knew there was a bathroom in here, but I wasn't sure where. I know it sounded stupid, but I really had never been in the room. 2 doors stood before me, and I chose the one on the left. I had selected the wrong one, I realized, as the closet door swung open and its hinges groaning in protest. I was about to close it and move to the door to the right, when I realized the smell was stronger here. I really didn't want to deal with it that moment, but a whiff of decay breezed under my nose. Fuck. A dead rat or some other creature had probably gotten stuck in the walls. I took the blankets out that were on the floor and noticed something weird. I saw the outline of a trap door where the blankets had been. Of course, I decided to open it, figuring it was the entry to a crawl space. Instead, I was faced with a ladder descending several feet down. I never knew there was a basement in this place. Even the deed listed that there was nothing under the house. This is the point in the horror story when every viewer tells the character not to go in, to take a break and think it through. I'll tell you, no matter how many times you say it to a movie, you will not think that clearly in real life. I grabbed my phone, switching on its flashlight, and began my descent. I don't really know what I expected. Maybe a small storm cellar or something? Although this wasn't really the space for it. However, what I found has shaken me to my very core. I reached the floor and spun to shine my light around. I pulled a small chain on the bulb hanging from the ceiling, and the room was coated in a bit more dim light. The smell was even worse down here, but I wasn't thinking about that anymore. I saw a desk before me, covered in papers, and articles were pinned all over the walls. In a horror movie, these would have been clippings of missing girls or disasters. In my reality, they were scientific articles. New genetic treatment could save millions. Doctor researching electricity as potential cancer treatment. And even, could lunar rocks hold an elusive cure? There were even more papers, all with my mother's handwriting covering the desks, walls, and every other surface I could see. Her doctor's scrawl was hard to read, but I tried to decipher what I could. I saw dates and notes, each describing the symptoms and developments. My father's name was all over the papers, with dates as recent as 3 weeks ago. Flipping through what I could grab, I realized there were dates from every weekend we had been here. I thought my mother had spent all her time in her room. But really, she was down here writing, reading, researching. The last paper I picked up was the most intriguing and confusing. It was dated about 9 years ago and described what she believed was a cure. It discussed how her patient had been doing much better and that she was incredibly hopeful for the recovery. My mind was spinning at this point. What I could put together was that she was researching cures for cancer and recording observations. Perhaps she had been doing all this in an attempt to help others, to save them from suffering the same fate as my father. What I was not sure of was why his name was all over the papers, but I soon found the answer to that. I stepped back and tried to breathe, completely confused by the fact that my mother had a secret underground lair. After breathing in that rotten air around me, I decided to walk around the room a bit more. Shining my light further, I noticed a door I had overlooked before. I approached it and could smell the air worsening in quality with each step. Opening it slowly, I was nearly overwhelmed by the decay smell, tenfold worse than before. I shone my light in and couldn't hold it in anymore after what I saw. I vomited all over the floor, only worsening the smell around me. And there was a body laying on a cot in a pool of blood. It took everything in me not to turn on my heels and run, never looking back nor returning to this cottage. I wish I had done just that. I got closer to the cot and realized the body had a familiar face. It was my father. He was older than I remember, his hair starting to gray and several more lines along his face. His eyes were wide open, his mouth stuck in a look of horror. A hole I knew to be a gunshot wound was in the center of his forehead. I may not have instantly recognized it, but it was in the exact same spot as the one my mother had when the police asked me to confirm her identity. They had told me it was indeed from a gun. I ran up the ladder, slamming the trapdoor behind me and covering it back over. There was no way that was my father, but I knew him too well. The body even had the same forearm tattoo he had gotten in celebration of my birth. From what I can piece together, he had been alive long after I had known him to be. All the trips to the cottage flashed before my eyes, how my mother insisted on going every weekend, how even when she was sick she would make that hour drive, and how she never really left her room and forbade me from entering. I knew what she had been up to. She was using my father as an experiment. She was trying to find a cure for him, and I have to say she did a damn good job, as he was only recently dead. I've been thinking on this for a while, and I think I know what happened. My mother had found a cure for cancer 9 years ago. She had worked tirelessly to keep my father alive. I couldn't figure out why she kept him down there for so long, and I may be grasping at straws here, but I think it was for his own safety. My parents were murdered, that much is clear to me now. Whoever killed them probably wanted to keep them quiet about something, and I think that something is the cure for cancer. Companies are making millions off of treating patients who are desperate to stay alive, and the cure could disrupt their whole operation. That's why the files were taken from my mom's home, and her car keys also had the keys to the cottage, where I assumed the intruder then went and killed my father. I don't know if I can forgive my mother for keeping him from me for so long, for letting me believe that he was dead. But what's worse is that now that I know, there may be people out there after me.